Hey there, you guys. Welcome to class 8 of our American literature class here. First off, I want to talk a little bit about the literature review and just kind of point out a couple of things that I'd like you to keep in mind. So basically, the literature is the literature review, also called lit review. Literature has too many syllables for me. It's ironic, I know. But the lit review is really simple. Okay, it's not something that you should be stressing out about. It's essentially a book report about your sources, your secondary sources. So it's how they connect together, right? So it's identifying 3 ways in which they talk about similar ideas. Now, of course, not all 6 sources have to coincide with one another on each point, because then you'd be reading essentially the same articles. That you want to make sure that you have at least 2 sources that are intersecting with each point that you're talking about. That's kind of the major thing here. And then we just identify how those sources are interacting on that point. Okay, now that sounds super simple when I say it, and then you're going to sit down and you're going to go, oh my goodness, I don't know how to write this, but you do. Okay, this is not, if you're feeling like you are not sure how to write this, you're overthinking it. Okay, and basically every student who I've ever had do this assignment in the past, they told me that they were super stressing, and then it turned out that they were fine. Okay. For some reason, my camera here is only showing a wide angle, which means you're seeing the entire mess of this room right now. I'm so sorry. So try to avoid looking at that. But that's the big thing, is to make sure that you don't stress about it, because if you're stressing, you're overthinking, and then it's going to add other stuff, right? Your ideas don't come into play here. It's just your source material. That is it. Okay, you are identifying those 3 points that your sources intersect, and then you are developing how those points of intersection happen. In the next essay is when your ideas come into play, and they are the big guy. Okay, it's not your sources anymore, it's your ideas, and making sure that you've got your ideas front and center, and then your sources are kind of backing you up. And I have a metaphor about that in the assignment requirements for the research paper, but I'll probably also make a video about that, so that way you can kind of hear a conversation about it instead of just have to read it. All right, so those are kind of the big things that I wanted to point out about the lit review. Do any of you have any questions about it, or are you feeling pretty confident? Kind of where are you in terms of comfort level with this assignment? Okay, Elena, you say you've been doing fine with the outline so far, and I think it'll be easy to write from it. Cool. Cool. In theory, once you have the outline done, all you have to do is just add some transitions, and then you're good to go. So that's kind of how this is set up. And with any luck, you'll be able to use a good chunk. I know, Elena, you and I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but you'll be able to use a good chunk of that assignment that we just did on Friday to kind of help you figure out exactly what you want to say in this, right? Because you identified the points that you wanted to talk about, and in theory, you've got how those sources are intersecting just in the bare bones already, right? So I'm glad, Elena, that you're feeling confident. Hopefully, Safa, Monet, and Josie, you guys are feeling confident as well. If you're not, definitely let me know. In fact, if you want to stay after and talk about that, I'm happy to do that with you. All right. So any other questions or anything? I'll just give like 10 seconds just in case you thought of something as we were going through. All right, so let's get started kind of talking about the readings for this week. We have someone else who's joined us, so that's awesome. Welcome. But first off, I do want to talk a little bit about the kind of timeline, because right now the readings that we have are ranging anywhere from 1861 to somewhere, 1861 to somewhere in the 1870s. We don't really know in terms of Alger's poem exactly when it was published, but it's a safe bet based on scholarly ideas that it's the 1870s. So what kind of happened in there? Well, obviously last week we talked about the Civil War. That started in 1861, and then we've got the Civil War ending in April of 1865. The 13th Amendment that banned slavery was put into play January of 1865, so a little bit before the Civil War ended. The 14th Amendment, granting citizenship, privileges, due process, and equal protection under the law, was 1868. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. We had the 15th Amendment saying that state and federal government can't stop people from voting. Like every male citizen has the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That's a quote from the Constitution. Um, And then 1872, the Amnesty Act, right, that reversed most penalties against the Confederate states, the people who were barred from federal office because they, had led insurrection, rebellion, and treason. So, there was that. And then we come to like a financial crisis that led to a depression that lasted between 1873 and 77. Then we have the Civil Rights Act of 1875, right, all the way down to 1879 when Edison created the first commercial light bulb. Now, why did I just list all of these out? Was it to make you fall asleep? No, it wasn't. It was just to show you how many things were changing in this 2-decade range. Okay, a lot of things shifted, right? The economy that was based on plantation farming, built on the backs of enslaved people, that couldn't really be a thing anymore. I mean, it still kind of was, but like it wasn't supposed to be a thing anymore. We had the Civil War and then multiple amendments that changed the face of the country as it was known at that time period. And then, of course, still the struggle between the North and the South, whether it was during the Civil War or after, there was still political struggles and turmoil. Then a financial crisis, right? So all of these things coupled with the fact that there's now increased transportation across the United States. So people were able to relocate or visit places or go out west much easier than, say, taking the Oregon Trail, right? Everybody knows, well, maybe I'm too old to make this joke, but wait, okay, we're pausing. Has anyone ever played the game, the Oregon Trail? Okay, so Elena says that she's played it. Safa, you say no. So basically, the big thing about the Oregon Trail is it was like an old school computer game that they recently recreated into a card game. But the big thing is that everybody died of dysentery or snake bite or some weird thing. So it's kind of like the running joke. You go travel out west, you're gonna die of dysentery. So if you hear that in a meme, yeah, or cholera, yeah, absolutely. So some sort of crazy awful illness, right, is going to befall you if you go out west, right? But now we've bypassed that because we have access to reliable transportation out west. Of course, that came along with like strikes and things like that, which complicated travel a little bit. But at the same time, we've now got this hyper mobile compared to previously type of people, right? We can move people, we can move things, and then we get the light bulb in 1879, right? So, and that changes the face of everything. Could you believe 150 years ago, the light bulb, right? It's just phenomenal to think of the progress that we've made in that 150 years. But before then, candlelight, gaslight, that's it. So, we have this cultural shift in a big way in kind of multiple avenues. So that's kind of what I was trying to point out here. And then, of course, the ongoing political turmoil, that's kind of continues for a bit. And then economic turmoil, too. So this is a time that's pretty hectic. So 5 minutes of me saying, like, stuff's crazy right now, right, in this time period. But we can kind of see that in the works as they go through. Maybe not so much with Dickinson, but definitely we can see it with Twain, we can see it with Hart, and we can definitely see it with Alger, again. So let's start off by talking about Dickinson. She's pretty mellow. It's a nice way to like segue in. So I taste a liquor never brewed. Is this speaker, right? Because narrators in poems are called speakers. Is this person like drunk? Like what's going on? No? We don't, no one? The speaker drunk, not drunk, metaphorically drunk? What's going on? All right, I'll take the lead on this one. And then you guys are definitely in for Mark Twain's short story because I hate that short story. I assign it because I kind of have to, but that's like worse than Sleepy Hollow for me. So, okay, so we have this poem, short, sweet, and ironically not actually about alcohol, right? So I taste a liquor never brewed, right? So that tells you right there, not true liquor. Okay, this is not something that was brewed. This is something that's natural. Okay, and of course you need to distill liquor. You need to, I don't know any. I'm not a drinker. I don't know anything about the process. I respect that people enjoy it, but I just don't care. So right, so this is something that is not actual liquor. This is something natural. It's something that we then see in all of these nature metaphors throughout the rest of the poem, right? So, Dickinson starts off, I taste a liquor never brewed from tankers scooped in pearl. Not all the vats upon the Rhine yield such an alcohol, right? So, Dickinson is saying that these tankards that are really fancy and just very nice and ornate, they this is the cup that she drinks from, right? Or he, whoever the speaker is. This is unlike the the vats of wine that are made in the Rhine, right, which is a very rich wine country in Germany. Some of the best wine in the world apparently comes from there, as says Wikipedia, because I don't know these things. Sidebar, Wikipedia is amazing for finding out facts. I know that teachers up and down everywhere will tell you do not use Wikipedia, but as someone who has actually contributed to Wikipedia before, they fact check everything. So don't use it for a paper, but definitely feel confident that you can use the material for background information and things like that without feeling like you're going to say the wrong thing and it's going to make you look stupid, because that's not the case. So, we've got this, not all vats upon the Rhine yield such an alcohol. This alcohol that she is drinking, or that the speaker is drinking, is something that's different from a true alcohol, right? And so Dickinson sets that up in the first stanza here, and then goes on to talk about more stuff. What is this stuff? Let's try again. I kind of took the lead at the beginning. What is this stuff that she talks about in the next stanza? Okay, Elena, you say you feel like she's talking about happiness. I think that's part of it, but what's provoking the happiness? Is it just any old thing? Is it something specific? Okay, freedom. I could see that. I could see that. Safa, you say like the beauty of the nature around her. Absolutely, I agree with that. And the reason that I also agree with what Elena says is that it's very clear that the speaker does feel some sense of freedom and happiness from the natural world, right? We see, inebriate of air am I, right? So the speaker is drunk on the air, right? Just breathing it in just fills them up with goodness, right? It fills them up with some insane level of happiness. And debauchery of do, right? Debauchery, like, doing bad things, not bad, but like, I can't even think of the word. I apologize. But just like drunken debauchery, right? But on dew, so water, rain, natural water in some way, reeling through endless summer days from inns of molten blue, right? So that kind of that kind of interesting combination of the summer day. Now we expand out from air, dew. It's now summer days and inns of molten blue. What could inns of molten blue be? Yeah, the sky, absolutely. So it's the sky. It's this space around the speaker that kind of encompasses them, right? So an inn. Ultimately, these things are metaphors, and in the next stanza we see some personification going on. How do we see personification? Or do you guys need a refresher on what personification is? All right, I'll assume we need a little bit of a refresher. So basically it's giving something that is non-human human traits. Okay, the landlord being compared to a bee, absolutely. Right, so the landlords turn the drunken bee out of the foxglove's door. Do foxgloves really have doors? Maybe if you don't know what a foxglove is, but make sure you look it up. Foxglove is a type of flower that is poisonous for humans, but definitely safe for bees, right? They need to pollinate, things like that. So yep, Safi, you say she talks about the butterflies too, right? They renounce their drams. Um, and the speaker says, I shall but drink the more, right? So when the butterflies stop pollinating, then the speaker will just gorge on that too, right? It's this sort of interest in just taking in the natural world, in a really physical sense. But of course, it's not happening in a physical sense. No one's going to go around and like I don't know, get pollen off of butterfly toes. Like that's not really a thing. Um, but it's this sort of engorgement. And then we have this final paragraph, which always seems to stump people. And I've heard so many different interpretations of it. So I want to know what you guys think. Till seraphs swing their snowy hats and saints to windows run to see the little tippler leaning against the sun. What in the world is that? Nothing? All right. Oh, okay, Elena, you say you really don't know. Okay, so it's a little bit strange. Okay, Safi, you say maybe people wanting to look at the sky. Okay, absolutely, right? It's these people who see the reverence in nature as well. But there's definitely like biblical imagery in here. And the way that you can tell that is seraphs, right? So that's essentially angels. Snowy hats would be halos. Saints to windows run. So you've got that imagery of saints. Of course, saints tend to be, at least in Catholic churches, in stained glass windows. So there's a lot of this religious imagery happening in this final paragraph. And then we see to see the little tippler leaning against the sun. What could be a metaphor for the sun? Or what could the sun be a metaphor for? God, yeah, absolutely, Safa. So the sun is a metaphor for God, right? And so if we think about it in terms of what Dickinson seems to be doing, which is equating God with nature and the natural world, right? Being in nature is like being in God's presence. So if we kind of bring us through that last stanza again, right? Till seraphs swing their snowy hats, right? And that's, kind of swinging around like this is generally a gesture of welcome or goodbye, right? So, and saints to windows run. So these saints in the stained glass, kind of where light shines through, are peering outward to see the little tippler. Tippler is like a drunkard, right? So to see this person, this speaker who's like all drunk on this natural world leaning against the sun, right? Like the natural world brings this person, the speaker, closer to God. All right, so kind of it makes you go through a bunch of steps, but Dickinson is amazing for making you have to think through the language. Okay, that's a really big thing. And another big thing is, of course, if you see words that you don't know, like if, say, you didn't know what a serif was, just do a quick Google. It's so nice that we have the internet that makes it so that we can just easily check. And that would have kind of helped you think through that metaphor a little bit. So that last stanza kind of ties everything up in terms of what the poem is about. So what else do you guys want to add there? What did I miss? Is there anything that you noticed as you were reading that you felt like you wanted to share with us? We can be done with Dickinson. So let's... Oh, Elena, you say you imagined it as the beginning scene of Sound of Music when she's running through the field. I love that movie. That's legitimately like my favorite movie. So thank you for bringing it up in class. So she's running through the field. She's just happy, like comfortable, confident, happy, just loving life. Yeah, Safa, exactly. Reminds you of people saying they're high on life. For sure. Right? So, those two ideas kind of work together. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you know what that scene looks like, because how do you forget Julie Andrews running through a field in the middle of, I don't even know what mountain range that is, but it's so pretty. So it's that idea of the natural world just engulfing someone and just sort of taking them in and bringing them closer to some sort of higher power. Very cool. I really like that. those comparisons that you guys make, you guys. I really, really like that. All right, so let's talk about the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. Least favorite throughout the whole term. Anyone else feel that way? Anyone like it? And then you say it was just funny. Why was it funny? It was so weird and different from anything we've read. Yeah, it really was. It was. You could almost picture going into like some old, rundown, dingy bar. Those are my favorite kinds of bars. If my feet don't stick to the ground, I don't like going into a bar. But you go in, you see this guy just sitting in the corner. You know he's been drinking all day, and he's got the stories, right? That is Simon Wheeler, right? It's that guy. Everybody knows that guy that you do not get talking unless you want to be there all day, right? So we see that happening in the story, right? And it's just such a normal thing. We go from this really high, elevated kind of natural world is the pinnacle to just everyday life in Twain's piece here. So, what about this stuck out to you besides it being weird? What about Jim Smiley? All right, Simon Wheeler's interesting. He tells this story, but he's just like the average sad older dude who sits in the corner, right? Who just talks and spins stories. But we've got Jim Smiley. What about Jim is so interesting? Did anything stick out there? He could change anybody's mind. What do you mean by that, Elena? The story was about him being able to talk to anyone. Well, that was more Simon Wheeler, the man telling the story, as opposed to Jim Smiley, right? Because Jim Smiley was just going around trying to make bets with everybody. Now, of course, he was able to talk to anyone because he was trying to get money from them. I mean, he even told the parson. Is that what they called him? Oh, no worries, that happens. That totally happens. But we even see him talking to, what do they call? Yeah, Parson Walker. When his wife was super sick, he was like, "Oh, how's your wife doing?" And the parson said, "Oh, she's doing a little bit better." And he was like, "I'll bet you that she dies." Like, what kind of person would do that? Like, it's just such an interesting character in that sense. Like, what in the world is this Jim Smiley guy? What is he doing? Besides the fact that, he definitely is a betting man, he takes chances, which kind of suggests something about himself. What do you guys think? What does that suggest? We don't hear much about Jim Smiley himself, but we do hear a lot about his interactions through his bets. So, what does that tell us about him? Well, it could tell us that he's just perpetually unsatisfied, right? He's not happy unless he's making a bet with somebody about something, anything, right? They even say that if he doesn't end up, this is on page 58, if no one will take his bet, he'll bet the opposite and try to get people to take his bet that way, right? This is a man who just wants to gamble. Okay. Now, of course, gambling addiction, sure, but that wasn't a thing. Well, I mean, it was actually a thing, but no one knew it was a thing until pretty recently, right? So, that tells us that he is constantly striving for something, right? In this case, winnings, maybe recognition, right? Because he was always that man who could bet on the dog that would always win, or the horse that looked like it was going to keel over but won the race. He was also, he had a one-eyed cow with a stub tail that looks like a banana. Just these outrageous things that you don't really think like, oh yeah, this guy's going to succeed, and then he tends to win his bets. Now, of course, this could be just a situation of him under promising and over delivering, right? Being like, oh yeah, look at my really little dog, look at my horse that's about to, die of what did they say, distemper, like, and asthma, right? This is not a horse that should be winning races in theory, unless he's kind of hyping it up to make the conditions worse so that then he could win, right? Which of course is totally a thing, right? So, we kind of see a lot about Jim Smiley. He obviously likes the underdog. Otherwise, he would pick a really big dog and name it Andrew Jackson, and he would pick a frog that, or maybe another animal besides a frog, Daniel Webster. I don't know. He'd pick a massive horse that really looked like it was going to win, not just actually stuck it out and won. Right. So he likes the underdog and likes giving them the opportunity to succeed. And in some ways, that probably reflects back on him, I would say, in the sense that when you bet on something continuously that's an underdog, you ultimately end up being a reflection of that as well. So he, in many ways, is also an underdog. So, okay, we saw a few things here. What did you make of the fact that the dog was named Andrew Jackson? Did you guys look into that at all? Okay, Elena, you thought it was interesting but didn't think about it too much. All right. Anytime you see a name that sticks out, and this isn't just talking to you, Elena, this is to anybody. When you're doing literary analysis, if a name sounds familiar, look it up. Okay, and the reason for that is, Andrew Jackson was the president between 1829 and 1837. He's the one who pushed through the Indian Removal Act and kind of forcefully relocated Native Americans along the Trail of Tears. So we see, history sees that side of him. But what we don't see about Andrew Jackson, the man, not the dog, is that he led the US Army in tons of battles. Okay. And he was constantly able to stick it out. He was very impactful in getting, I don't know if that's a word, we're going to pretend it is because language is flexible, in getting Florida, Georgia, and Alabama kind of brought into the Union, right, or to the United States at the time, right? So he did a lot to overcome things that seemed impossible to overcome, right? Because at the time, Florida, Georgia, Alabama were very heavy Native American country. So there was no way to really kind of annex it and bring it into the United States without removing Native Americans. Now, of course, there's, it was an awful thing to do, but at the same time is that he worked to get the United States in a position to be able to take over that land and move the Native Americans to someplace awful, right? Wherever that ended up being, some tiny little postage stamp sized reservation in inhospitable land, right? You can tell how much I really like Andrew Jackson. Seems like an awful dude. But at the time, he was definitely favorably ranked, right? If you kind of look back, obviously they didn't have polls, but typically history looks at him as a good president, despite the fact that, he also did some awful things. So, we've got this kind of underdog, consistently an underdog in the sense of this territory was not his. He went in, he fought battles, he took control, he pushed, the people who did own the land out. And you would not actually expect that to be the case, right? So in a way, Andrew Jackson, the man, is just as much of an underdog as Andrew Jackson, the dog. And the fact that Andrew Jackson, the dog, would go for the hind legs and just kind of crunch down until the other dog, tapped out, is kind of similar to what Andrew Jackson did with the Native Americans. So, make sure you look into names. Same thing with Daniel Webster, right? Because he was, interestingly enough, he was an opponent of Andrew Jackson's policies. And he was also part of the Cottonwigs, that's what they called them, who wanted to keep a good relationship with the South. Of course, he was from the North, right? So he was trying to work to appease while also at the same time, you know, saying like, "Oh, shame on you," but also like, let's work this out, right? So definitely someone interesting. I couldn't quite piece that with the frog. What do you guys think? Because Andrew Jackson definitely works with the dog, but Daniel Webster with the frog, it's a little more complicated. No? I mean, unless it's something like, you know, the fact that Daniel Webster was the man was just full of hot air, right? And then Twain substituted shot for hot air, you know what I mean? Because he was a skilled orator, things like that. I feel like there's something that I'm missing from my research that would tie it in really nicely. So, you know, if you guys wanted to look into that a little bit and submit a little paragraph explaining, here we go, extra credit opportunity. If you wanted to look into that and submit a little paragraph, what I'll do is I will add you know, if I buy your analysis for why Daniel Webster works as a name for this frog, 5 points extra credit on your outline assignment that's coming up. If you want to do it. If you decide to do it, send me an email. It'll only be for people who watch this video, I'm not going to post it anywhere on Blackboard. So as a little thank you for always coming to class and being present, I appreciate that very much. So if you want to do that, write me a paragraph explaining how this frog is similar to Daniel Webster and is a good symbol, and I will add some points for you. All right. So why train a frog to jump? Here's a better question, maybe. Did he actually train this frog to jump and eat flies? Safa, you say no. Why not? Like you said, you were wondering why he was training frogs since they already do that. I'd imagine, Safa, that's kind of right along what you were thinking as well. Yeah, yeah. He takes 3 months to train a frog to do the things that frogs do. This man has too much time on his hands, is what I'm getting from this. So, yeah. Yeah. He didn't train this frog to do anything. He just, I don't know, maybe pretended to train for 3 months. Maybe not. Maybe that was just a good story, a good addition to the story, right? Because this short story is just as much about storytelling as it is about these absurd little details in Jim Smiley's story, right? Or I guess this story about Jim Smiley, because Simon Wheeler's the one telling it, right? So, yeah, no. If you smack a table behind a frog, it is always going to jump. If you tell a frog to eat flies because flies are in front of the frog is always going to eat the fly because it wants to eat the fly. Like, this is why I get frustrated with this story, right? But the big thing here is that Jim Smiley finally got, or not finally, because it happens periodically, but he gets outfoxed every time. He bets on the underdog, he makes money, and then he ends up losing. And when he loses, he also loses his means to make money, right? It's sort of this interesting twist, right? He has the horse, and the horse, you know, looks awful, whatever, wins him money, and then what happens? The horse dies or something. I can't quite remember it right off the top of my brain, my top of my head. But the horse just sort of disappears. We'll say that. And then he gets the dog. The dog ends up winning a bunch of dog fights, and then he goes to grab the back legs of a dog that doesn't have back legs. Kind of absurd to put a dog with only 2 legs in a dog fight. I mean, absurd to dog fight at all, but this is the 2021 perspective. But then this underdog, this tiny little pup, ends up losing, and Jim Smiley is out of another underdog. And then he decides to find a frog to jump against other frogs. Is there an underdog there? It sounds like Jim Smiley made himself the underdog on his own, to me. And then a one-eyed cow with no tail. We don't even need to go into that. I think we can see it. But Jim Smiley's an interesting character. And then we see our narrator like dipping out of there real fast as soon as Simon Wheeler gets distracted. He's like, I can't listen to another story about Jim Smiley. And also, you know, he's sending a letter back to his friend saying, why would you make me do that? Right? So anything else that you want to add about this story? There's a lot packed in here. We just don't have too much time to dig into it deeply. Safa, I just saw your last message. It's the frog's natural instincts. It's like saying you taught someone to breathe. 1000% right. But well done, Jim Smiley. Well done. Teaching that frog how to jump. All right. Okay, good. I'm glad we finished that story because this next story is arguably my favorite. I love this story. All right. The Outcasts of Poker Flat. What did you think of this story? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was interesting? Did you want to throw it out the window? It was very interesting, but you felt like it had a premature ending. How did you feel that it was premature? There was no closure with the married couple and everyone just died. Yeah, that's true. Now, think about this, though. Okay, we just finished reading The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, right? And it was very much the story about a weird dude, but kind of his everyday life, right? And then we have this that ends in a way that's not a happy ending, that's not there's no closure, like Elena says. Why is this similar, in a sense, to the kind of hyper-realistic, weird story that we just read by Mark Twain? Do we always get closure in life? They both lost everything in the end. They did. They did. Absolutely. And, you know, kind of on a grander scale, this idea of realism is, you know, something that everybody can interact with, right? There's really not much closure in the Twain piece either, because the narrator just like runs away, so he doesn't have to hear anymore. And then here we see everyone die, and there's not much closure there as well. So this idea of no closure in a time that's so turbulent, would you imagine that people living during this time where there's so much cultural change and so much political turmoil and all of that, would you imagine that they felt much sense of closure? Not really. Yeah, I would agree with you. I would agree with you. So I'm thinking, you know, I am a firm believer in the fact that people do not write in a vacuum. And I know I've said that on some of your work that you've submitted to me. But there are so many people that are like, we need to judge these works of literature on their own with no bearing. I am not one of those people. Okay. I think that everything that impacts people ends up in their writing in some way, shape, or form. Right. So this idea of such a turbulent time period with so many different types of change happening really makes it so that you don't see the end of many of these changes, right? It just ends up being, you know, something happens, something else happens, something else happens. Maybe the end of the first thing happens, but then there's another thing, and then maybe another end. And you just never feel like you're done, right? There's always so much change happening. And so I would venture that that is part of what they're trying to accomplish here. So why are all these people on the road? Who are these people? Are these just random people? Okay, criminals, sure. But interestingly enough, they weren't criminals just a few days ago, right? We had John Oakhurst, who's kind of the protagonist, maybe. He's a gambler and he was in Poker Flat pretty often. And we know that because we found out that he ended up, winning a lot of money off of the people that live there, right? There's also a prostitute, right? We have the Duchess. And then we have Mother Shipton, who I believe, based on context clues, would be a madam, right? And then Uncle Billy, who is a thief. Right. So, depending on how you read these characters and how you interpret who they are, and the system that was in place before this new spasm of virtuous reaction, as um, as Hart puts it, whether that would have been a crime before that complete about face, right? Because we find out right at the beginning that this town is a town unused to Sabbath influences, right? So that was on page 1. We find that out right away. So this isn't a town that was typically a religious town, but it became religious because of some sort of financial crisis. So we kind of have that in our mind there. Um, and then, of course, Hart tells us that this virtuous reaction is quite as lawless and ungovernable as any act that provoked it, right? So, one extreme provokes another extreme, and then, like, what happened, right? Like, there's no compromise at that point. So, we kind of have that. And these people are these people bad people? I mean, the town kicks them out, so the town thinks they must be. By 21st century standards, not really. Yeah, I would venture to say that probably not even by Poker Flat standards, just weeks before this, right? Because these people were obviously making a living there. And, sure, we see that juxtaposition between, the gambler John Oakhurst and then Tommy Simpson, right? This super naive boy who runs away with his sweetheart to go to Poker Flat, right? There's definitely a disconnect in terms of innocence there. But ultimately, we find out, and I'm kind of fast forwarding through this because I'm trying to be mindful of the time for you guys. But we kind of see that everyone has a level playing field, right? They go hang out, get snowed in. It's awful. There's lots of death happening. But of course, we don't see that until right at the end when boom, 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 everybody dies, and that kind of complicates things. We find out that Tommy most likely got back to Poker Flat to send the law enforcement to go check on these people and bring them home. We find out that the Duchess dies in Piney Wood's arms, and they end up not being able to tell who was the prostitute and who was the virgin, right? They couldn't tell because you know what? Death is the greatest equalizer out there. So, we kind of have that. We have Oakhurst, a man who is prideful, who is, a gambler again, who kills himself rather than fight through this battle that he will not win. Okay, because they have frozen to death 4 days before people get there, right? So in a way, it shows us a really realistic idea of what happens out west, and then in another way, it kind of gives us an idea of what kind of turbulent times they're living in. All right, and then really, really, really quickly, I just want to say that the Alger poem after the battle essentially is a prayer. Okay, I just want to put that out there, talking to God about the struggle of death during war. Okay, so if you didn't get that out of the reading, take a quick look back. It's less than a page long. It shouldn't take you that long to read it, but essentially it's a prayer. All right, so I apologize I tried really hard to keep it before 8, and it's 8:01, so I'm so sorry. But you guys have a great rest of your night. Do awesome things. If you want to talk to me about anything, literature review, other stuff, please hang out. If we have multiple people, we can kind of section off into breakout rooms, and I can talk to you kind of in a line. But, if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great night, and I will see you next time.